Welcome back to The Explainer. Today, we are breaking down the complex realities of the recent, highly anticipated summit between Donald Trump and Xi Jinping. If you've been following the news at all lately, you've definitely seen the flashy headlines, the grand handshakes, and, of course, the bold claims. But right now, we're going to look way past the surface and demystify exactly what happened behind closed doors. We're unpacking the rhetoric versus the reality to help you truly understand the massive implications of this monumental meeting.
Okay, let's dive into this. We're going to cover Taiwan geopolitics, look at the domestic reactions, run through the trade ledger, check out the tech titans visit, and finally uncover the unspoken realities.
Starting right off with Section 1, Taiwan geopolitics, distance and diplomacy.
So, as we know, security issues heavily dominated the initial discussions. Even before the summit kicked off, Trump made some very pointed remarks during a Fox News interview right on Air Force One that literally sent ripples across the international community. He stated flatly, "We don't want anyone to go toward independence." But what really stands out here is his logistical reality check. He brought up the sheer massive distance of theoretically having to fly 9,500 miles to fight a war. He emphasized that he just doesn't want to see that happen, which really highlights a deeply transactional, pragmatic view of military defense over that vast geographic distance.
And this brilliantly illustrates an interesting tension surrounding a long-standing U.S. policy known as strategic ambiguity. For roughly 50 years, the United States has never been entirely explicit about what it would actually do in the event of an attack on Taiwan. It's a deliberate lack of clarity, basically designed to prevent unilateral moves by anyone. The recent rhetoric, however, introduces a completely new dynamic into this half-century-old precedent, and it's making international observers really question if the lines of ambiguity are subtly shifting.
Adding to this major shift, Trump actually confirmed that he touched upon the topic of arms sales during his meetings with Xi Jinping in Beijing. And the immediate takeaway from that? Major historic military packages for Taiwan. We're talking massive deals worth $1.25 trillion and 400 billion new Taiwan dollars might face delays. Trump noted that he might approve them or he might not, essentially putting a total pause on these critical arms sales. This is a really profound moment, because negotiating Taiwan arms packages directly with Beijing represents a massive departure from 50 years of established precedent.
Let's move to Section 2 and see how this builds into Taiwan's polarized interpretations, domestic reactions to the summit.
So how exactly did Taiwan react to these sudden geopolitical shifts? Well, as you can imagine, locally, the interpretations were deeply polarized. On one hand, we have the official stance. Taiwan's Ministry of Foreign Affairs and the ruling party responded by firmly reiterating the status quo. They stated clearly that Taiwan and the PRC are mutually not subordinate, and they really emphasized their ongoing commitment to maintaining peace and stability in the region. Their overarching message was one of cautious handling, emphasizing a strong desire to continue communication with the U.S. and work towards mutual regional stability, entirely despite the changing tone.
However, contrasting sharply with that official government stance are the voices of political commentators and opposition figures. They viewed the summit's outcomes, particularly that pause on arms sales and the direct talks in Beijing, as a heavy blow and literally a bucket of cold water. The core argument presented here is that relying entirely on guaranteed U.S. backing might just be a serious miscalculation. They suggest that the current administration failed to grasp the rapidly changing international shifts, and they're serving this up as a stark public warning about Taiwan's strategic vulnerabilities.
Moving on to Section 3, the trade ledger, negotiations and shopping lists. Now, pivoting from the abstract, highly charged realm of geopolitics to the actual dollars and cents, this summit was heavily focused on economic agreements. Trump approached this trip very much in the role of a super salesman for American goods. Looking at the preliminary outcomes across these 5 specific categories, we're seeing some major movements. In energy, China agreed to purchase U.S. oil, directly impacting local economies in states like Texas, Louisiana, and Alaska. We saw action in aviation with Boeing, which we'll unpack a bit more in a second. Crucially, on tariffs, there's a proposed mutual reduction of $30 billion worth of goods, essentially equal steps to de-escalate the ongoing trade war. There's also talk of loosening some technology and chip restrictions, and, surprisingly, a diplomatic consensus reached regarding the denuclearization of Iran. That's a rare area showing where U.S. and Chinese interests actually aligned. But let's look a little closer at that aviation deal. So, the crucial point is this number right here, 200. Before the summit, the media was absolutely saturated with expectations that China would purchase 500 Boeing aircraft. The reality? They bought 200. Now, while that's still a significant order that helps Boeing in the short term against competitors like Airbus, it fell drastically short of the hyped expectations.
And as a direct result of missing that 500 mark, Boeing stock actually dropped by nearly 5%. It's a perfect example of the rhetoric not quite matching the reality. Looking at the broader economic reality, there is a massive foundational disparity between the two nations. Since the era of reform and opening up, nearly 80,000 U.S. companies have invested in China. On the flip side, less than 10,000 Chinese companies are invested in the U.S. So, why the huge gap? Well, a major argument points to the increasingly hostile environment for Chinese companies operating in America. Just think of the intense scrutiny faced by platforms like TikTok recently. This massive imbalance highlights exactly why both sides are recognizing the desperate need for a mutual investment protection agreement to truly secure business interests across borders.
Section 4. The Billionaire Spectacle. Tech Titans visit China.
You know, you really can't have a super salesman without an elite entourage. And this summit was just as much a spectacle of corporate power as it was of political diplomacy. We had an incredible roster of high-profile attendees who traveled alongside the diplomatic mission or joined up in Beijing. That included Elon Musk of Tesla, Tim Cook of Apple, NVIDIA's Jensen Huang, and Qualcomm's Cristiano Amon, who publicly expressed a ton of optimism about China's vibrant economy. But, and this is kind of funny, it wasn't the billionaire CEOs who ultimately stole the show at the Great Hall of the People. It was actually Elon Musk's 6-year-old son, X. Dressed in a traditional Chinese vest, he completely captivated the room and the entire internet, with Musk even posting videos online sharing that his son was learning Mandarin. Sometimes, the best public relations has absolutely nothing to do with corporate strategy.
Finally, Section 5. Unspoken Realities. Behind-the-scenes political wrangling.
Now, what's really interesting about this breakdown is how it visualizes the divide. Because for all the smiles, the billionaire appearances, and the signed contracts, what didn't happen at this summit is perhaps the most revealing thing of all. There was no joint press conference. Instead, each side flew home and released essentially competing narratives. On the U.S. side, the focus was heavily on specific wins, stability in the Taiwan Strait, the consensus on Iran, and the domestic jobs tied to agricultural and aviation trade. On the Chinese side, state media didn't validate the U.S. talking points at all. Instead, they focused entirely on President Xi's official positions, projecting domestic strength and highlighting a message that China's doors are wide open for foreign investment. They both participated in the exact same summit, but each side took exactly and only what they needed for their own domestic audiences.
Which brings us to our final thought. We've seen a sudden pause on historic arms sales, the application of a highly transactional, super salesman approach to diplomacy, and domestic audiences being fed carefully tailored, separate narratives. So the question we have to leave you with today is this. How will these sudden, fundamental shifts alter the global geopolitical landscape as we race toward the upcoming U.S. elections? It's a high-stakes puzzle, and the ripple effects of this single summit are really just beginning to be felt. Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer, and as always, keep questioning the headlines.